Hi Priya, I think we can make a start now.
Okay, excellent. Okay, hello. Hello, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, wherever you are in the world and joining us. My name is Priya Raghunath. I work with the Standard Chartered franchise in India. And thank you all for joining us on this discussion on investing in women entrepreneurs. A global estimate of the sheer number of women entrepreneurs is actually 250 million, which sounds astounding. But that actually translates to only 1 in 3 small and medium enterprises globally, which are run and owned by women. Over the next hour, we're going to discuss how important this aspect is. We'll talk about why companies need to invest and what we can do better, not just as companies and as in the finance sector, but also communities to lift the participation of women in this arena. We'll also spend some time talking about what are some of the most common hurdles that women face and what we can do, and what are some of the ideas we can do to remove those. We're going to keep looking at the Q&A, so please pop in your questions as and when we go through this conversation. We'll make sure that we try and address as many of them as we can. I'm joined for this discussion by a team of panelists. You can see them all on your screen, I hope. And they're not only passionate about the subject, but they bring a wealth of knowledge and experience in this space across various countries. And I think we've pretty much covered the entire globe with the panelists that we have today. Let me start with a couple of introductions. First, we have Amelia Ng. Amelia is the CEO of Olia, which is a JV between Standard Chartered and Link Logis. It is a wholly digital trade origination and distribution platform that's really changing how trade finance works. Also joining us is Yvonne Gayebi, who is the head of the consumer wealth and private banking business in Ghana for Standard Chartered. Yvonne is solely responsible for driving the retail strategy in Ghana and brings an extraordinary experience of the African market. We also have Aditya Mandloi, who runs the SME business for the Standard Chartered India franchise. Aditya's worked across countries in South Asia, and he understands what are the unique challenges as well as the opportunities for the SME landscape. I'd also like to welcome Chinali Patel. Chinali is the Counsel International Illicit Finance at the British Consulate General in Hong Kong, and is also the chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee at the British Consulate General. Chinali's perspective of some of the macro factors that impact not just women entrepreneurs, but women per se, is going to bring some really valuable insights into this conversation as we go ahead. And finally, we're joined by Aisha Abbas. Aisha is an influential voice in the UAE banking world. Aisha heads Standard Chartered's affluent segment and branch banking for UAE and is a leading advocate for D&I in the region. Thank you to all of you for making the time for this chat today. Before we get into this discussion, I just want to start, Aditya, I want to start with you. We talk a lot about the opportunities that present themselves if we invest in women entrepreneurs globally, locally. Is that opportunity real?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all, and thank you very much for taking the time and joining us for this discussion. To your question, Priya, I'll refer to a study that BCG did sometime in Q4 2019. And, one of the findings was that if all women and men around the world participated equally as entrepreneurs, the global GDP would actually ultimately rise by approximately 3 to 6%, which in dollar terms would mean $2.5 to $5 trillion. Now, these numbers are really staggering. And just this in itself should convert anyone who's sitting on the fence asking whether or not to tap into this opportunity, right? Now, to realize this fully, a concerted multi-year effort will need to be made, focusing on improving the access to finance and training for women, and the various policies by financial institutions without government support will actually serve as a very key enabler in making lines of credit available. The other thing which, are key conditions that foster women entrepreneurs is really one, high quality of governance. Number two, a very positive social and cultural attitude, because you will have across various parts of the world based on old historic customs, etc. Uh, it's quite shunned upon women to take a step out and walk shoulder to shoulder with men. Now, in Southeast Asia and Pacific, these regions boast of very supportive conditions for women owned and women oriented businesses. Even in several African economies, and Vion will also, make some comments on this. In Ghana, Uganda, Botswana, Angola, Malawi, and Madagascar, we've actually got women-owned businesses comprising 25% of all local businesses in those economies. Now, that's a very big number, right? Now, if just look at India, out of the 63 million SME units, in the last decade, the number of women-owned enterprises of this number has moved from 14% to 20%. So there are steps which have been happening towards this, opportunity. But when we start putting the dollar values to it, I think it will just accelerate the entire pace. So yes, this opportunity is very real.
Right, right. Thanks for that, Aditya. Amelia, if I can come to you. Aditya touched upon, one of the things they touched upon were the kind of barriers. And I think we all want to see, more women taking up that mantle. And like Aditya says, there has been growth in many countries. But there are certain structural barriers which we just kind of heard about. Now, whether those are regulatory, a big one is access to financing. In your experience, and you've seen this up close and personal, what are some of those structural barriers that you see? And we'll talk about some of the enablers a bit later, but what is your sense of, some of these big hurdles that remain in place structurally for women to get into the space?
Well, thank you. I think there are actually quite a lot of research in the market that coming out to talk about the structural barriers, right? Let me share a little bit of what I observe right now on both like at Aulia and also on a personal level. So number one is actually easy to understand, right? Today, structurally, there's about, when we want to promote women entrepreneur, particularly in getting the financing gap, today, statistically, only 2 to 3%, 2.3% actually, of the venture capital funds that actually are actually going to women's the ventures that having women as the entrepreneur. And these, to me, if you think about it, if you boil down to the thing is a lot of the people that work in the industry, they are male. Coming from the background is who will go into the venture or the private equity of the world, they're usually the. And if you go back, then is like at my time, the frontline bankers. I remember in my year of the junior analyst pool, women's probably 10. So it's almost like you think about these bit of bankers then become the private equity, the venture. So it's almost that you need to work back for 10, 20 years in order to address that. But it is not the end of the world. I think a lot of the people are beginning to recognize the issues, right? So I do think that other than structurally, there's certain industry that entrepreneur tends to get funding. It actually doesn't itself has that much of a gender diversity. The second thing is physically and mentally, as the difference between male and females are quite telling, right? People don't realize that some research already saying that the body temperature, so the office temperature, what temperature should a woman actually feel comfortable, is actually different from a man. Whereas most of the office settings are actually adjusted according to the man's physical need in terms of that temperature. Subtle things like this is actually what I think is actually structural disadvantage to female, right? Of course, then there are a lot more research about the sort of social pressure, the mental or the sort of upbringing of the female, the society as the structure that actually will need women to play a certain role at home. itself. So there's quite a lot of barriers, but I do think that by recognizing the barrier is actually the first step to solving the issues. And I think one of the important things, like a forum like this is already good because we are bringing out, we talk about it, right? Before you not even talk. Right now you talk about it. And I personally think that if you stare at a problem long enough, you know how to solve the problem. I don't have a crystal ball today, but I imagine myself trying to do that. It's like I share this sort of information. We all know this information now, then we are actually, every one of us is in it to solve it.
No, absolutely. If you stare at a problem long enough, yes, we'll come up with a solution. That is very true. Uh, Aisha, if I can come to you, Amelia touched upon this aspect of the role that women have to play, and especially across most Asian markets or Latin America, there are some very stark cultural barriers, and that's because of the expectations that exist for women and the role that we have to play in the house and at home. You've been in the Middle East, and I know that you've been actively engaged in D&I in the Middle East for many years. Do you think things are getting better now, or are they actually getting better, or how difficult is it still to balance both of those asks?
Thanks so much, Priya, and thank you ever so much for the opportunity to come and speak about this important agenda today. First of all, I'll echo exactly what Emilia alluded to. Very well put, that the more we talk about this, the more we raise awareness, the more closer we will get to ensure that not only women, but all varied experiences, may it be gender, may it be ethnicity, may it be experiences, that everybody is included. And as we have forums such as these, I think raising awareness will accelerate even further, and as a result, change will come. So really, thank you for hosting this event. In terms of cultural barriers, certainly they exist, and they exist all over the world even today. You see, women by nature are viewed as the homemakers, the nurturers, bringing families together, the caretakers. And I have to say that we often see that even when it comes to education opportunities, and mom and dad may have limited budget, so the preference tends to go to your brother as a sibling than to yourself when it comes to pursuing specialized education and where you have to travel. Because often it is felt that maybe it would be safer for the boy to travel abroad, but the girl will keep closer to home. So that cultural difference still remains. And even when looking at roles, whenever there's a role advertisement in a multinational, and I'm still sticking to employment, I'm not even reached entrepreneurship yet, because there's total different ball game there. Even under employment, whenever a role may come through with a multinational organization, and the role involves international mobility, global mobility, then you tend to, as a lady, how will I travel to different jurisdictions? What would it be like? And then we must appreciate, whether in employment or in entrepreneurship, we must all appreciate that women go through some specific changes through their life cycle. There's that age when you get married, and then your childbearing age. And once you have children, you bring up the children. And as the children grow older and they leave your nest, then women enter their premenopause or menopause stage. A lot of changes that go over that as well. So inherently, we already deal with those matters as they come along. And then this cultural pressure, when it's added, then the situation is aggravated. However, having said that, by having sessions such as these, and by organizations really making an effort now to talk about inclusion and talk about diversity, and in fact, setting very stringent targets to bring women up the curve, and even in entrepreneurship, you see, there's this thing attached with women on cottage industries. Traditionally stuck to sewing, to basic education, to cooking. But I think women now are going beyond that. We are seeing more and more women entrepreneurs coming up, and I can now come to the Middle East in specific, whether in leadership roles and complex leadership roles, space industry, technology industry, road and transport network. All of this is now being led by women, and more suppliers, vendors, and banking, hospitality, you're seeing women coming up with newer ideas. And I'll relate to what was said a little bit earlier, by my colleague Aditya, that research has shown that when you give inclusion to women, you're talking trillions of growth into the GDPs as well. So things are changing; they're moving in the right direction. But I don't think we can declare victory yet. We've just started. The journey is long, and the journey will only become better and shorter if men, women of all ages, of all generations collectively participate in this important agenda. Thank you.
Thanks, Ayesha. No, you're absolutely right. I think we all talk about, and we'll talk a little about inherent biases, a bit later. It's interesting. I mean, we're all echoing, and we're seeing the same experiences across markets. Yvonne, if I can just pose the same question to you as well, because you're somebody who has championed and seen examples of hashtag breaking the bias every single day. What in your sense, and if you are, and especially because you're running that business in Ghana, what are some of those specific needs and barriers that you're seeing, either specific to your market or what you've seen personally as well?
Thank you. Thanks, Priya. And hello to everyone. So it's really real. It's been said that everyone is a bit biased. However, we must see biases for what they are. They are really rooted in centuries of erroneous practices that have shaped our culture and tradition, and subsequently crept also into our workplaces. So some of the biases that we've seen, it's really also based on self-limiting beliefs. Oh, for example, I'm not good enough, or someone can do it better because of my current circumstances. And this all dovetails into the fear of failure and timidity. And so many women would like to be very thorough, and that's the fear of the unknown, of the entrepreneur's world, can be limiting. Again, for fear of being considered arrogant, many women may shy away, shy from touting their business achievements. And like Aisha also indicated earlier, social expectations come to play, like when to marry or have a job. And let me share a personal story. When I was going to do my further my grad studies in the US, one of my extended family members actually commented that by the time I come back, I'll not have a suitor, an eligible suitor to marry. So why bother pursuing education? After all I have to do is take care of family and kids. But I was fortunate to come from a background where the girl child education is real key. And my dad didn't have opportunity, but he made sure that he would provide enough for us. So he would have none of it. But for my upbringing, I mean, I could have not being strong-willed, I could have fallen into the status quo. If you also look at where women are sometimes perceived to be less competent than men, stemming from that unconscious bias in our minds for male preferences and segregating into gender roles. I think this was earlier mentioned, that you have typical roles like engineering, piloting, that should be for guys, and homemaking, nursing, teaching, the soft stuff should be for men. Who does that? And you sometimes even see it in the corporate environments where these role-based biases appear during team engagements. Unconsciously, ladies are asked to sort out new plans while the guys decide on, say, the games to play. If you look at our social cultural issues, I mean, in Africa, it's really prevalent. in our society, women have dual responsibilities, whether we like it or not, to do their businesses and to cater for the families. And one cannot simply gloss over the point that these responsibilities sap a lot of energies and takes our time. So that existing challenge is finding that good balance between the two spheres. So having that correct work-life balance or that perfect blend demands having that perfect work-life balance or perfect blend of these demands and being able to deliver to one's full potential as a woman in the business can really be a tough ask. So you can only conquer with the grace of God. Working for an institution like SCB that prioritizes flexi working and really having that support system. If one is unable to manage efficiently, then the perception that women in childbearing ages are less committed to their jobs becomes a reality. Finally, if you look at it all in my line of work, and Aditya had also mentioned earlier, lack of capital comes to play. So veering into the business venture, but money to any business person is like food to the human body. You cannot do without it. So unfortunately, even after women have proven themselves time and time again that they are capable, we still have some finance houses being hesitant in supporting women in their financial objective, thinking that the woman would up and leave and not pursue the task at hand. So if we have institutions like SCB who have made that bold commitment to lift participation of women-owned businesses and solidify the economic foundation of their presence in their present countries, it will invariably create that ripple effect in society as women support their families and the economy at large. So in Ghana, we've launched Lift. It's a business banking segment proposition that we definitely is simply Lift by Standard Chartered. Is a very compelling proposition where transactional financing and advisory needs are available to women-owned businesses. So Priya, that will be my initial comments. We really need to be deliberate in getting rid of the stereotypes by admitting that we are biased. And then full participation of women can be improved a lot whilst redefine the future. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks, Yvonne. Chinali, if I can just build on what Amelia, what Aisha and Yvonne have both said, and in terms of, it is easier said than done in terms of breaking through some of these cultural, barriers. And I want to ask you about, because you do have a wider perspective, Chinali, in terms of not just women entrepreneurship, but also in terms of how gender parity per se, and while we've touched upon it, gender parity plays a role in terms of impacting how many and how well women entrepreneurs do. Just from where, and we all know that I think most of us, who are women or identify as being women, in our lifetimes, we will not see parity. I think the current rate is in 136 years from now is the estimate that men and women will be, will reach that stage of true equality. But I think, like we're saying, I think the conversation about any conversation about women in business cannot be separated from this larger underlying problem that we do have. So from your perspective, how big is that problem? Whether it's access to education, to financial education, whether it's the digital divide between men and women, or whether it's the fact, I think Aisha touched upon it, that women end up participating in more vulnerable sectors, vulnerable from a perspective of being subject to the vagaries of economics. How big is that problem from your perspective, and are we getting past it?
Thanks, Priya, and probably $1 million question. All questions, in fairness. Thank you, everyone, for making time, and it's really quite compelling kind of discussion. I think the points raised by fellow panelists has been really kind of, educational as well. So I think from my perspective, just a bit of a kind of a personal story. So the reason, I guess, in terms of, pursuing a career in law enforcement, I felt like coming from humble beginnings in India and trying to do that kind of, in UK, there wasn't a kind of, here you go, here's your career on a platter. I think the first thing that I was told in kind of, with many Indian families is you either are a doctor, dentist, lawyer, or, many other kind of, blue collar professions. Law enforcement is not something that immediately comes to anyone's mind. But in doing so, I have to say, Priya, what that truly opened up for me particularly is the amazing women leaders in different sectors. So the role that I've done, or the roles that I've done within the UK law enforcement career, has exposed me to different women in different sectors. And kind of the key things that have come to mind when kind of, engaging with them is that there is that kind of, gender parity in terms of opportunities. So I was quite fortunate. For example, my parents encouraged me to pursue a career, which I always address it as the path less traveled, to be honest. But not many women who want to do that are encouraged to do that, not least because I think Aisha, Amelia, and Yvonne touched on this. There are general perceptions about what women should do. And I think the fundamental issue around women entrepreneurship is also social beliefs, societal perceptions about what you should be doing. And if a woman has chosen a particular business to progress, a particular career to progress, the first thing is, well, you're not up to it. You're not meant to be doing this. This is against the grain of what women should be doing. So I'm really pleased to say it took me a while to get over with the fact that, I had a bit of an imposter syndrome. I won't lie. Law enforcement can be very male dominated. There wasn't someone to hold my hand to say, Chinali, this is what you should be doing when you're kind of, pursuing investigations, whether they're money laundering, fraud. I also worked with a lot of women victims. So we did a lot of modern slavery, human trafficking cases. And even there, I think when you look at sexual exploitation, you'll often see that, women come from a deep set of, societal pressure into doing something. And when it comes to, I guess, we talked about, and I think Yvonne and Aisha definitely touched on this, some of the stats in UK are quite startling, to be honest. So recent evidence from UK survey of SME finances reported that women were charged more than men on term loans. So for example, 2.9% to being charged 1.9%. So that still exists, Priya. And I know this is a kind of a medium to long-term aspect, but these are the kind of things that we truly need to address from a governmental perspective, from a societal policy regulatory perspective. Around 1/3 of women say access to funding is the biggest barrier to starting a business compared to 20% of men. Again, Amelia, Aisha, and Yvonne really touched on this. 35% of female business founders still face gender bias when raising their business capital. And I think this equally resonates with what panelists have said. I think investment in education is really important. When women are looking for that funding, governments supporting that, institutions, governing bodies supporting that is really important. I think you need to lead by action. I think less of kind of, having those forums that we're addressing the issues, more of taking this away and saying, what am I going to do about it, in fairness? And I think my concluding point was going to be that STEM education, I almost feel you need to start at the educational children stage. I was quite fortunate, like I said, where family encouraged me to pursue the education that I wanted to pursue, in fairness. But investment in STEM, encouraging girls in education to do that, I think it's really, really important as well.
Thanks. Thank you, Chinali. I want to build on, and I'm going to come back to you in a minute, but I do want to build on some of what you said around where the government steps in. But before that, I just want to ask Aditya, and just, like like I think everyone has been saying, and as you said, there's this huge opportunity. One spanner in the works, or maybe a blessing in disguise, has been COVID. And before we talk about some of the enablers, and we kind of build on that, I just want to ask you, Aditya, the impact, especially on medium enterprises, has been exceptionally harsh. And I think all of us in our own markets, in our own businesses, have seen that up close and personal. But I think the impact on women entrepreneurs within that segment has been additionally severe. At the same time, COVID's also opened up a whole bunch of opportunities that didn't really exist. Is that something that you've seen? And what do you think, Aditya, from your perspective, what do you think some of the long-term impact of that of COVID, and how women entrepreneurs are changing the game a bit? How much of that do you think will actually stick with us and be sustainable in the long term?
Yeah, so Priya, I will first put out a set of statistics, because that really drives home the point of how tough COVID has been while it's been tough for mankind and society as such, but it's been that much tougher for women, right? And there's nothing that drives home a point more than when you put it and you see it against numbers. So just a set of 4 stats. 2 in 3 women-led firms, right, were strongly impacted by the COVID pandemic. Now, this is about 64% versus 52% in the male-led businesses. Then about 54% of all who lost jobs in this SME sector during the pandemic were women, right? Then 90% of the women who lost the jobs have not yet returned to work, compared to 70% of their male counterparts. And what's also happened is, the women entrepreneurs have found it that much more challenging to access formal finance or finance from the formal sector. When you look at all this, COVID has really been that much more debilitating for businesses which have been led and managed by women entrepreneurs. And however, despite all these challenges, whether it's in the current pandemic or the challenges that were faced by women earlier, they continue to be very, very resilient, very confident, and optimistic in their approach. I think it just happens, given the various responsibilities that they keep juggling right through the various stages of life. Now, we as members of financial institutions, jointly and in partnership with the industry associations, industry bodies, the local government bodies, and the various multilateral institutions, we must really join hands, because this is not going to be that just because we're doing this discussion, suddenly something will change, or it'll change because COVID has happened, or because it's 22 moving to 23. But it's going to be, like I said earlier, a multi-year effort. And what we really need to do is, amongst what many panelists said, number one, dial up consciously the engagement with women entrepreneurs. Number two, leveraging the existing set of financing schemes that are already prevalent and ensuring that efforts are genuinely made to reach out and ensure that this financing, formal financing, reaches entrepreneurs who are women. And number three is help build networks, provide access to mentors, and help provide platforms which will help these women towards upskilling and skill set building. These are just a set of activities that go towards helping.
I think we've lost Aditya. Okay, so we'll give it a minute for Aditya to come back. But but I just want to take away the one. Okay, I think he's coming back. Just let's give it a second.
Sorry, I think my line dropped. So I don't know where you lost me. But my last point on that question was really that we collectively need to ensure we help build networks, provide access to mentors, which is very, very important, and provide platforms where women entrepreneurs can really look at, without any kind of discomfort, look at upskilling and building skill sets without having to feel in any way inferior to their male counterparts. This is a long haul, and the only positive I see from COVID, because you said somewhere about a blessing in disguise, I don't think COVID was any blessing anywhere. It was tough on everyone. But the only blessing in disguise, so to speak, is that COVID has accelerated the adoption of digital platforms and digital technology and penetration of mobile. So that, along with some of the financing schemes, and I'm sure someone will speak about it, will really help accelerate, try and level the playing field between male and females. Back to you, Priya.
Thanks, Aditya. Thanks. I do want to, we've got about 25 minutes left, and I do want to talk about financing as well as digitization and community building. But before that, I just want to go back to Chinali for a minute. Chinali, you made a comment about the ecosystem, whether that was STEM or whether it's investing in STEM or just investing in some of the, in breaking down some of the more cultural, issues that exist. In many of our countries, especially in many developing countries, there are government interventions which are targeted at women entrepreneurs. Have you seen some of those work, and have you seen that those directly benefit women? Any insights you'd like to share?
No, thanks, Priya. And I think Aditya actually, just to say, outlined some excellent points and really practical points there. I think from a governmental perspective, where the pandemic was concerned, I think, as Aditya already put it, it hasn't been a blessing in many ways. But I think the blessing has also been many of us, including women entrepreneurs, have paused and reflected, what is it that they want to do? I've often seen, particularly in Hong Kong, women truly kind of having been that self-reflective aspect and saying that actually in the job that I'm in the situation that I'm in, can I truly pursue what I always wanted to pursue? And many women, in fairness, have done that. But what has allowed them to do that is having really effective, policy, regulations, and initiatives in place. Without having that in place, I think it's really difficult, whether you're a woman entrepreneur or a male entrepreneur, to kind of, progress certain aspects. Pandemic really threw to the fore how important digital aspects were, how important human interaction was still through kind of, virtual aspects as well. And one of the key things, at least from a UK perspective, that we truly reflected on for over the last 2 years is how important it is to have that work-life balance. Working with local councils, working with local governing bodies and SME business leads to say, actually, we need to think about a flexible, agile working environment. And women, I think, really kind of benefit from that because we are juggling constantly. I think the main worry, and one of the stats revealed that one of the biggest issues for a woman entrepreneur closing her business is for personal reasons, not bankruptcy or anything else, it's for personal reasons. So I think it's really imperative to remember that. And investing in programs, investing in girls' education from the offset. So in UK, for example, supporting underrepresented groups. I think that's really important. Communities are not just a certain dynamic, of stats. We need to think about underrepresented groups and encouraging women from there to pursue, careers in banking, engineering, science, and mathematics. So I think that was a really good investment. But most importantly, policy and legal aspects. So having something in place, for example, around shared parental leave, so the onus just doesn't fall on women having to take that as a break. You're sharing that responsibility with your husband or your partner. So I think that's really important. And lastly, as a point, when it comes to kind of, policy aspects, monitoring, raising awareness of gender discrimination. I think going back to my original point that I made, social beliefs plays such a significant role. And I think we need to continually pause, evaluate what works, what doesn't work around gender discrimination. How can we ensure there's a reporting back function from institutions that support women entrepreneurs? So you don't leave a policy in place for a number of years without having a refresh or a review or a legal aspect either. So I think all those aspects are really important, Priya.
Okay, thanks, Chunali. You made one point around women closing businesses, and Aisha, before we talk about financing, if I can come to you for a minute. One of the challenges that women do talk about, especially when women exit businesses that they've built over, they've tried to build, is really that of, and I think Aditya I think touched upon it, is that of community building and access to sponsors, access to mentors. Pretty much everyone's building a network today for women entrepreneurs, whether that's Goldman Sachs or MasterCard. There is a lot of investment in that area. How important do you think, Aisha, they are, and is that access to other co-founders really the really the make or break pivot around which women decide to go ahead or get additional support?
Thanks, Priya, and it's a great conversation. And I love the fact that my colleagues on this cohort are actually quoting statistics, because when you put facts next to a narrative, then it makes it even more stronger. So really, thank you for sharing that. And I hope this meeting is recorded, so we can always refer back to it as much as I was. Taking notes. So Priya, my short answer is yes and no, and I'll elaborate why. See, when it comes to businesses shutting down, we know that by and large, a lot of startups and majority of startups, new businesses, whether led by men or women, they do shut off. I believe where women can do better is to remain confident and not give up too soon. And women inherently do not give up too soon when it comes to their home matters. But it is often seen that women, being perfectionists by nature as well, tend to give up when they see that it's not perfect. So give it time, take risks, take more challenges, and face and weather the storm as it comes, because there is always that silver lining that one can hinge on as well. So that'd be the first piece. The second piece is, one cannot underestimate the importance of sponsorship and mentorship. I know my colleagues on the cohort alluded to that as well. Mentorship and sponsorship is critical, and having multiple mentors from different industries is also key, because you learn so many insights. And even if it is an area which is not your expertise, it's always better to participate in those networking sessions, because as you network, you meet people, people give you access, access gives you entry. So therefore it is important to be present and participate in networks, but make sure that it's still relevant, because then being everywhere and not grasping the opportunity also doesn't help. The other thing is that women must also continue to invest in their personal development as well. And there is no mountain that they can't climb. And if there is something that, as it is said, whatever a mind it can conceive and believe, it can achieve. So for as long as they have an idea, they should relentlessly pursue it. Network, meet people, find mentors, importantly find sponsors, and sponsors not just for funding, but sponsors also for giving those access opportunities at the same time. And one most important thing to highlight over here is that as you're going through that journey of educating yourself, you must be ready to take risks, because whether it is employment or it is entrepreneurship, there is always that element of loss that is there, and taking that level of risk is equally important. And do we see that happening? Yes, certainly we see that happening, and we see that women are coming to the party, and they are picking up challenges that have been taboo for them prior, and they are themselves breaking that glass ceiling, because historically, whenever you'll see vendors or suppliers coming through, it'll be mostly around clothing or accessories, or children toys, for example, or makeup for that matter. But now we're seeing more and more entrepreneurs coming through, to represent different parts of the industry as well. And I will close by saying that one must never underestimate how important sponsorship, mentorship, and networking is. And regardless of how busy you are, you must find time to do this. Exactly what we're doing here today. I'm sure everyone was in this call is incredibly busy, but yet finding time to talk about this agenda is very important. And I sincerely thank Janali for sharing such stark statistics with us. I mean, I was taking notes as she was talking, and those things must be brought to the table even more. Thank you.
Thanks, Aisha. So, Amelia, women are coming to the party, as Aisha just said, and of course, the big enabler is financing, and while of course everything else works around that, and you talked about this, Amelia, right at the start in your when we started this conversation. But in 2021, only 13% of the 309 unicorns were actually women owned. What do you think VCs need to be doing more of? And we'll talk about the larger financing, but just specifically for startups and for women, why aren't women getting more funding, and what do VCs need to be doing differently?
I think a lot of barriers that we have discussed in the last 40 minutes are all contributing to it. So you think what VC or a female entrepreneur can do is, I will sum up with a few things, right? And a lot of things I think Standard Chartered does actually quite well in that. Number one, I think we definitely want to encourage more female participation in the investment community. If you look across major private funds today, the investment committee, I would say majority of them are men. I mean, for the reasons that I've spoken about. And the important things I think have female decision making then is that you will actually bring that much of a diversity view in terms of they could understand more in terms of how women actually communicate. Because I mean, face it, women communicate differently from men, right? And men perceive that communication in a very different fashions, right? The way that we wear, I mean, the way that we speak are perceived completely, can be completely wrong from the actual content. To have the sort of diverse view into the investment committee, I think is a one big sort of step. And one thing I'm not meant to actually just talk about Standard Chartered, but the unconscious bias training for everyone is important. And because it's unconscious, every one of us has it, right? Yvonne said that, let's face it, we all have our biases, right, on different aspects. So I think specific unconscious training really to both female entrepreneurs and also the VC is important. We have to understand how they look at us when we communicate, right? We could have a lot of sound business model, but then they felt all about this treatment, but just because of the way we talk and the way they proceed. So the training part of making sure that everybody's conscious about that. And then I was actually thinking one other thing that, again, what Standard Chartered did is very good is when we have a vacancy, we are required to actually consider a certain percentage of female CVs when we actually interview. And I think absolutely should apply that because you should get, it's almost like you going all the way up to make sure that you have it. At the end, of course, the decision is based on merits rather than actually, I don't personally suggest a positive bias. I actually promote equal opportunity. And at the end, the one that get funded should be the one that actually worth the money. But we should erase all the necessary bias until you can make quite an object assessment on the funding. On the female side, absolutely agree. Networking, absolutely agree. The importance of coaching, and we should step up, right? We don't know, and we really need to know that, like a lot of times, because men and women, we enjoy different things, right? So our social network itself actually is a limiting factors. So as a female entrepreneur or the one that actually making the decision of funding any venture, I think both sides has to also recognize and reach out. If the VC are not doing that, we should go out of our way. And we all know about the 6 degrees. I'm sure today, LinkedIn or your Facebook. When I started earlier, the first time I systematically looked through my network, personal network, to see who can be useful, you will be amazed how many people that can help you within the first or second layer of the network. So networking, coaching, get everything we need.
Okay, thanks, Amelia. So, and I think my takeaway from that is that we need to do both on more sides, and that was a really interesting perspective about what do aspiring entrepreneurs also need to be doing differently as they're kind of going out there. I want to just ask Yvonne, and because Yvonne, you touched upon something that you've seen work well, which is when it comes to financing and access, a targeted value proposition for women. And you'd mentioned you'd launched something in Ghana. There is an associated question on the chat, which is around from Stuti, who says that as you're doing this, is repayment behavior between men and women somehow also does that also play a role? And I think just off the cuff, are women better in terms of repayment? Can you, Yvonne, just talk us through a little bit of what you've seen in terms of what works well for banks and non-banking financial companies like us, more traditional forms of credit. What really works well? How do we go out there and get more women into the fold?
Okay. Thanks, Priya. And really, yes, there is opportunity. Aditya had alluded to the fact that, and even if you look at the Ghana business, 46% of all private-owned businesses are run by women. It's women-led, as in business-owned, women-led small businesses, and that puts us in a unique position because per the last stats, Ghana was a country with the highest number of female-owned businesses. And if you look at the performance of the portfolio, the NPL that's a non-performing loan ratio for loans to businesses owned by women was a stunning about 40% better than the average NPL in the market. So this is a burgeoning sector with growing opportunities, and hence financial institutions would really be doing themselves if we don't focus in there. And more importantly, there's that unmet demand for credit among women-owned businesses, be it the formal micro SMEs or the informal sector. And hence, if you develop propositions that alludes to and resolves, one, provides advisory, two, helps with the transactional needs of the business, the women-owned business, and then three, addresses the financing piece, you would have that compelling proposition that would invariably help develop the economy. Because if you look at it, a woman managing a business tends to manage the family and also the extended. So once you help that woman-owned business, you also invariably help the economy at large. And so if you look at it at Stanchart specific, I know we don't have to really dwell too much, but that's our reality. If you look at what we've done, there's the Women in Tech proposition, the initiative, that just looks at women. There's already about 18 cohorts that happen. About 118 companies, women-owned businesses have benefited, support, advisory, and funding. And if you look at our Lift proposition, it's pivoted, like I said, around the banking made easy, You look at growing and protecting the finances, the business, and then getting more beyond banking, because it's not okay to just avail credits, but you also have to look at the total package. Do you require training? Do you need access to other markets? And that's where we are positioned because of our network to help businesses who want to be helped, because you cannot force. But like we say, when we talk about it more enough, people are able to know and pivot towards where we'll get support. I really think that there is opportunity, and hence it's our collective responsibility to make it happen. If you are blessed to be in that position, it's our collective responsibility to make sure that we leave a legacy and posterity will not judge us unfavorably. Thanks.
No, absolutely. That's our legacy. Thanks, Yvonne. I just want to end with, we have 4 minutes, but I'm going to ask Aditya one last question, and Yvonne touched upon it. Amelia, I think everyone touched upon it. And Aditya, the question really is around digitization, and I've been getting questions separately from folk as well. While we obviously have this ecosystem being built up, we've got propositions coming in. There's obviously awareness and building on removing some of the cultural barriers that exist. With this entire go-to on digitization, and we're all doing it, do you think that will give us an impetus, or do you think that we will end up carrying all of our inherent biases which currently exist today into cyberspace? If just a couple of quick thoughts on that, Aditya.
Yeah, no, so absolutely not on the biases part, but absolutely on the digitization helping the funding and impetus towards investing in women entrepreneurs. By its very nature, the e-commerce and technology-based businesses offer women a lot of flexibility and autonomy, helping them to manage and juggle the various responsibilities, be it on the home front, be it on the professional front, and myriad other responsibilities that, for men, it just that the world is functioning, and we don't really realize in reality how much our spouses or the women folk are really doing, right? So the internet, digital platforms, mobile phones, digital financial services, which really rest on these platforms, they will offer leapfrog opportunities for all women, not just women, but for overall, especially women, and will help bridge this divide. Now, digital technologies, therefore, will enhance the access to women for finance, right? Just one other aside, there was a question that was there, right, about how are the women repayment performance on loans and non-performing loans. So just a quick statistic from the Indian market. So the women SMEs have shown non-performing loans to be at 3% versus overall SMEs, which are at closer to 4.9%. Right. So there is a very clear, stark difference, and it shows that historically, women entrepreneurs have shown better behavior around loans and lines of credit that they've taken. So women as entrepreneurs would be great news for all. So more women as entrepreneurs is even better news for all.
Okay, on that note, we have 1 minute to go. Thank you to the panelists. It's been an insightful. I know it's been enriching for me. I want to thank everybody, all 300 and I think 370 people at one point in time who logged in to listen. This is going to be available, I think, on YouTube, etc. But thank you, everyone. Thank you to each of the panelists: Yvonne, Aisha, Amelia, Chinali, Aditya. Thanks so much for taking the time out to be here. Have a very good day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.